I want you to do me a big favor. Close your eyes for a moment. I'm going to give you 5 seconds of silence. And I want you to think about what really, truly scares you. Have you thought about it? Good. Now, your answer is going to vary from mine. A lot of people are scared of spiders. Other people are scared of things like disease. Some people are scared of more abstract things, like the idea of rotting alive or possibly even being alone for too long. The reason I bring this up is because of today's topic. It delves very heavily in fear, and I do have to note, due to that, there are going to be some triggers, so viewer discretion is advised with this one. Through all of human history, 2 things have always been a constant. Humanity's need to create mythologies, which are ways to tell deeply connected stories that explain the origins of life, how reality works, and ways to easily convey a lot of information. The second constant is fear, the oldest and strongest emotion that mankind has ever felt. Fear is a driving force for us as a species. It's what keeps us striving for better and better, but it also hinders us in many different ways, such as holding us back from changing and growing. Today, I'm discussing the Fear Mythos, a creative landscape that centers around fear as living concepts. I'm going to give a deep dive on these phobias and how they can be used to tell very powerful stories. I'm going to break this up into a couple parts to make it easier for myself because the Fear Mythos has been around for a very long time and has a lot of information. Today's main focus is talking about the fears themselves, and then we'll dive into stories, their connections, and the deeper metaphorical concepts that a lot of these fears have. And maybe if I can, maybe I'll interview some of the writers if I can find them. For those uninitiated, the Fear Mythos is an immense, detailed writing community spanning thousands of works and featuring a good number of antagonists to each. Its original purpose was a spin-off of the Slender Man mythos and was created by Owen Norris, Adam Levine, and Sean Barber. In the Fear Mythos, there are these monsters called fears, original creatures that are, for lack of a better term, manifestation of humanity's most primal fear and phobias, hence the name. The Fear Mythos deals with blogs, vlogs, creepypastas, video games, and whatever else exists that regard these disturbing beings, including books. There is no canon, no continuity. Writers get complete freedom, and each canon is unique to its author. The Fear Mythos is a very large writing anthology, a way for authors to flex and stretch their writing muscles while having that firm baseline to work with, much like what the Slender Mythos was. The mythos is an ever-changing constant that has no definitive starting story or ending story. So to talk about the mythos in depth, as I said, I'm going to break this up a little bit. Right now I want to dive into a few fears, what they are, and how they manifest. To do that, we're going to start with some of the first fears of the mythos, created by the 3 creators. We're going to talk about their manifestations, what they do, and what they represent. In 2012, we were introduced to the Archangel, the Dying Man, and the Cold Boy. We'll start with the Archangel. The Archangel is the portrayal of the fear of dying, religious dogma. It is the origin of the Great Gameverse, where it is depicted as a twisted bastardization of the afterlife. Once a human being dies, their soul will become part of the Archangel and will be tormented in the afterlife for all eternity. Joseph Stewart, the protagonist of one of the first blogs the Archangel came from, believed that the only exception to becoming part of the Archangel was to be killed by a different fear. This, he stated, would send you to nothingness. The Archangel can also manifest as any dead person, but its favorite form is the figure in a gas mask. It will often assault humans for the purpose of increasing its supply of possible forms, and has been known to use ordinary weapons to do so, especially long-range ones. Why it chooses to do this over other methods is unknown. The Archangel has never been observed to speak, but has been known to communicate via writing. To summarize though, the Archangel is a creature that is in many ways a shapeshifter, composed of humans who have died. Now, generally, it seems that all humans seem to fall to the Archangel regardless of if you're affected by the fear or not. So a cancer patient who has no connection to these fears, who dies in their bed, will still become part of the Archangel. The Archangel is truly a weird form of hell, and my personal theory is that despite these beings having always been and always will be in the lore, the angel chose its face based on a time where fear and death was very heavy. World War II, where shifts on public opinion on religion took place, and sometimes the last people saw were men in gas masks, gunning them down from a distance. Next up, this one is similar to the Archangel, but has some fairly distinct characteristics that help it stand out. The dying man is the first portrayal of the fear of dying, also representing the fear of decay, withering away, and oneself. It unbalances its victims through possession. It jumps from body to body at the time of death. Once the dying man infects a person, their body will start to decay like a corpse. Symptoms of infection include necrosis and a variety of deformations. These include cancerous growths, the growth of extra organs, and scales developing. The speed of decay varies from victim to victim, ranging a few hours to a few years. When the host has become too decayed, the dying man will seek out a new body to jump into through physical contact. In most interpretations, the dying man is not a singular entity, rather it is split up into several incorporeal beings, often known as pieces or shards. These entities differ greatly from one another. Their objectives, personalities, and often the results of what they want create disputes. Prior to whatever caused the breaking apart of the dying man was one of the most powerful fears in existence, which makes a lot of sense because it is inherently the fear of dying. Now, the Archangel could also be seen as taking this role. However, the Archangel is more or less leaning on religious ideology. The Archangel itself, hence the name, is usually portrayed as an angel with wings. The dying man is a disease that festers. Next up of the original three is the Cold Boy. The Cold Boy is the first portrayal of the fear of isolation. It is a small boy-like abomination who represents the cold and alienation. In most stories, his modus operandi involves targeting lonely people and tricking them into mistaking him as a harmless child in order to trap them. But should someone look more carefully, they will quickly realize that he is made entirely of ice, which will crinkle and crack when he moves. The Cold Boy is the most simple, to be honest, but I think the simplicity is what lets it thrive in story potential. It makes me think of The Lonely from the Magnus Archives. The Fear Mythos came out about 4 years before TMA, so no correlation. However, keen viewers who know of the Magnus Archives can look at this premise and say, yeah, that's pretty similar to, yeah. The Fear Mythos came first, though, and obviously has a lot of different interpretations in canon. Hell, it could be said that the Magnus Archives is just an alternate Fear Mythos universe with a different canon. Now that is the first three. It's time to talk about the other fears and fear-related creatures. I'm only going to be talking about the first interpretation of these creatures, as a lot of fears have more than one interpretation created by different authors to suit their needs. For instance, there's like 6 different interpretations of the fear of dying. So we're just going to continue on by saying this one was the first of this. Okay? Okay. The first one I want to delve into, which is a personal favorite of mine, is Eat, which is an entity that looks like normal water. It represents a fear of drowning in a physical sense, and the fear of depersonalization, which creates a collective hive mind. It works by replacing water in a contained area, such as a lake or even a person, and taking it over. Any who fall to eat become a part of the hive mind, and overall the goal of eat appears to be much more on the metaphorical versus the physical. While eat does represent the fear of drowning, it more or less leans deeper into the fear of losing your own sense of self and becoming a part of a grander whole that you have no desire to be a part. Next you have devour, who represents the fear of addiction through fears of starvation and hysteria. It's actually a spin-off of eat and does something very similar to what eat does. It's more of a green sludge that can actually be proactive in its approach. Now, devour is a little special to me. Honestly, it's a very poorly written concept, but I actually took this concept during COVID and reinvented it. I made it into a creature that infects people and changes their morphology to make them creatures of goo that get pleasure by absorbing others into themselves, and thus, devour's hive mind links much similarly to eats. It also leans more into that addiction side of things, because if I'm being honest with you, I've never really seen people use devour in an addiction sense, at least not the blogs that I've read. They more or less do the starvation and hysteria lean. Devour is actually such a weird topic, because if you look at the comments on the Wiki page, it's all just people like kind of shitting on it, but I think devour just needs a fresh coat. Next up, the fear of anger, war, mindless rage, etc. is the brute, a creature contained by chains. The brute is connected to smoke and drives its victims to be vicious carriers of its terrible angry will. There is a fear that's connected to the brute though, the bride, who is just the same thing but spicy. She is quite literally made of fire and represents the fear of a ravenous inferno. The fear of being controlled, surprisingly, wasn't eat. It's the wooden girl. Very similar to Nicola Orsinoff from the Magnus Archives. But she turns people into puppets, quite literally, with strings as a common motif. So she might be a little closer to the web, but she is very, very Nicola Orsinoff in description. Her servants are all unwilling, and this fear chooses a servant, not based on any deeper preconceived notion, but just because she wanted it, and she will use them to her full advantage until they are useless. Disease is the plague doctor. You get the usual spiel. It's just a man, quote unquote, in a plague mask and full plague attire. However, with him, when he appears, that is when the disease starts. He has been described as having changed his appearance over time, so I think a lot can be done in the modern day with him. For instance, changing him to be someone with a respirator mask or something of the like. Maybe something a little more low-key. I think that could create some very interesting modern-day Fear Mythos stories based around the fear of disease. The fear of disorientation is honestly a very cool one to me. I always love concepts like this. The empty city, a liminal space that is sentient and plays with its food by changing its structure and geometry. There's something really cool about stories trapped in the empty city, and a really good web series made it work somehow in a video format. I'll link it in the description. It's a very good Slenderman series, but it also takes heavily with the empty city. The first portrayal of the fear of guilt is the black dog. Your secrets put out for all to see, and the dark truths that nobody should have known. It calmly stalks, attacks, or kills those bearing large, well-kept secrets. The black dog has also been known to mark its victims with scars and bring them objects associated with their secret, goading them into revealing it. It typically appears with a large, muscular body, pointed ears, and an elongated snout, with black or red eyes. Other stories depict it as more of a ghostly form made of black smoke. This one is the Black Shuck of, British Isle mythology, but the Black Shuck has always kind of worked for me in this context. I think the Black Dog really is a good candidate for the fear of guilt. It's just so ever-present and odd. And if I'm remembering correctly, the Slenderman web series, Carrots and Garden, actually used the Black Dog as a story plot point. So I think that's pretty neat. The portrayal of the fear of misconceptions is the choir. You're terrified of what others say about you, and what others think about you. But also, are you scared of what they think, or are you scared of what you think they think? Commonly, when this thing manifests, it includes blurs in the corner of the victim's eyes, fading shadows on the wall, or a gray fungal form. They are often written changing the words people say and will drive their victims to commit suicide. Many blogs have shown far more abilities than these, including an ear-piercing shriek, visual hallucinations, and the ability to manipulate reality itself. The choir is another favorite of mine, but also I think people might be overcomplicating it a little bit while also keeping it a little too simple, if that makes sense. I think the choir works the best without a physical form, as an ever-present creature, not really something that you could perceive per se, and I think it works best when it isn't quite aggressive. It is a passive fear, in my opinion. The first portrayal of the fear of nature is the convocation. It represents the fear of heights and being taken away. It is an eldritch mass of birds capable of performing many seemingly impossible feats, including the ability to literally nest inside of its victims' bodies. Convocation flocks are also frequently described, generating lightning in the air, hence why they are sometimes called spirits of the storm. Now, the convocation is very odd. It is the fear of nature, but quite frankly, the description really doesn't lend it to it. The fear itself seems to be more about heights and being taken over again. Being taken over is a very common theme in these. There's a very interesting theory from Crocodile Tears of Shaped Lake itself. They theorize that it was the lightning itself that was taking over the birds, turning them into a hive mind. So maybe the convocation isn't quite so much the physical birds themselves, but more of a grander thing that has connection to lightning. The convocation is also connected to the legendary birds of prey such as thunderbirds and a few other large birds. So there could be some more deeper implications for what the fear of nature actually connects to with convocation. The convocation, though, is a fun body horror concept because imagine you try to mug a guy and he just opens his mouth and a bunch of crows crawl out and start attacking you. That is metal as hell. Now, the first portrayal of the fear of nothing is the quiet, and it claims us all eventually. Described only as the complete absence of matter, the quiet manifests as a crack in reality and has the ability to erase anything from existence, even fears. It's usually depicted as a passive entity with no real mind of its own. According to the archive, the quiet likely came from an alternate reality as a result of that reality being torn apart in some way. It passes from universe to universe and has been cited in various different worlds. The archive defines it as the opposite of reality and suspects that the quiet's growth is responsible for a few different phenomena in the mythos, such as dimensional bleeding, which I will talk about later. The quiet is just fun, I'm not gonna lie. It is a mainstay in the web series Pabble Hall, which is a phenomenal Fear Mythos series that's just so good, does a lot with the format, and actually does a lot of interesting things with some of the fears too. Honestly, I will say The Quiet is very, very, very Doctor Who, though. The crack in reality kind of storyline. But I'm not hating on it. I think there's a lot of interesting that could be done with it. Especially because I feel like it lends to a sense of hopelessness. The Quiet shows up, then what the fuck are you gonna do? Eventually it's gonna get you. Eventually it's gonna get all of us. The Mother of Snakes isn't just the fear of serpents, but it's also the first portrayal of the fear of ourselves. What we are, what we have become, and what we might be. She is the fear of looking into the mirror and hating what you see. When you do, she is there, standing behind you, tempting you, trying to make you walk into the other side of the mirror with the promises of self-improvement. The Mother of Snakes is the most vindictive of the fears because it truly latches on the idea of making you hate yourself. The Red Cap is the first portrayal of the fear of temptation, shame, sexuality, and sex. It appears as red goo-like substance similar to blood and possesses people, called bloody vessels, using them to gather power amongst its followers. The Scarlet Marked, aka a cult dedicated to the Red Cap, typically get nosebleeds whenever it's close as a way to signify their god's presence. As I stated, they are a cult where they frequently engage in orgies, cut themselves, and bleed on one another, thereby increasing the Red Cap's power. If someone possessed by the Red Cap sleeps with another vessel, the Red Cap will be passed on to them. It's been shown, however, that two Red Caps may not get along. Red, the narrator of City of Sinopia, for example, killed a woman who was possessed and reabsorbed the Red Cap within her. So the Red Cap, similar concept to a few of the other fears we've had before. If you haven't noticed, there's kind of a lot of cannibalization on concept, but not so much execution. The Red Cap is basically just devour, but much more on the hyper-sexual drive of things. So yeah, the Red Caps just kind of devour, but with a new hat, so to speak. The first portrayal of the fear of the future is the manufactured newborn, specifically technology. Its primary manifestation as a small, unassuming object before it slowly builds itself bigger and bigger with inorganic and organic materials. When it's grown to what it deems to be sufficient mass, it will open a portal to a realm that it has connection to called the Towering Realm. That is where its true body lies. A vast tower of clockwork and body parts. The newborn has no goal beyond evolving, until it finally reaches a point of technology singularity. The newborn is also a favorite of mine because I feel like in the modern day, with AI and other advancements on the rise, you could make just a lot of terrible ways to change this fear. It could become so much more than what it is. The fear of the irrational is the grotesque. It's the fear of nightmares coming to life and the ambiguity that lies in our subconscious. It watches over its victims' dreams while they sleep and can enter their dreams to take control. It can show them things they've done, or it can cause them to go into a dream-induced stupor. In some stories, the grotesque is the herald for fears to come, never working by itself, but instead working in conjunction with whatever fear is in need of its aid. This makes the grotesque a very fun concept, because it just inherently doesn't want, it seems. This fear just is, much like the Archangel just is, but this fear is much more on a existential need. The Archangel needs to kill these people. The grotesque doesn't. It can just be. The last fear we're going to talk about is the fear of the unknown. Now, this isn't the first, but it's the most common. The Nightlanders represent the most ambiguous of all the fears, with everything from motives to appearance to behavior and abilities changing so drastically just depending on the story they're in. They have been written taking a variety of different forms, like voices that whisper in the back of your mind, shadows that speak, humanoid figures with dark skin and burning eyes, or moving pictures with a blood-stained book of grim tales. They are meticulous, dangerous, and demanding. Their games are important to them, but God forbid you deny them or disobey them or try to understand their game. Nightlanders take organs, loved ones' blood, and pain as punishments for opposition. The games that the Nightlanders play can last an entire lifetime, and many good men have gone totally mad from the psychological torture they've been put through. In many cases, the Nightlanders truly are the unknown in the most literal sense. Because how do you even begin to describe the unknown? Now that wraps up all the notable fears. I want to tackle some of the outer ideas not created by the Fear Mythos, but have become a part of it. The biggest being the Slender Man and the Rake. To summarize very heavily with these two, because if you're clicking on this video, you probably know who these two are. The Slender Man is enigmatic. It's a supernatural entity with nebulous, defined motives. It appears as thin, unnaturally tall, in a dark suit with a blank, featureless face. The Rake, brutal savageness. A character with canine-esque characteristics, a skinny, bony physique, pale skin, glowing eyes, long blade-like fingers. This creature's purpose is so unknown. It seems to only want violence. It gores, it lacerates, and it does not leave survivors. The Rake is very intelligent, however. It can speak, and it seems to create connections to the other fears as a way to maybe further its unknown goal. The Bleeding Tree. It appears to be a tree with black leaves. It has other distinguishing features. A large human-like face growing on its trunk, corpses hanging from its limbs, and red liquid resembling blood leaking from it constantly. It is unknown whether the tree is a fear itself or merely an extension of another creature such as the Slender Man. Hidden deep within the path of black leaves, which is where it resides, a black and white area of extensive forest with trees that similarly have black leaves. What is known is that it is apparently sentient and extremely malevolent. It's been known to infect victims, resulting in a tree slowly growing inside them until they are violently torn apart. The Bleeding Tree is a big favorite of mine, and actually the creator of the Bleeding Tree, Zero, kind of popped out of the woodworks to comment on the Wiki page, and this is what Zero has to say. To quote, "So many people have been debating what my old tree is or isn't. The tree, in my eyes, is a wishmaster. It finds what your deep desires are and gives you what you want in the worst possible way. Zero's desire was to be a real hero. It gave him that chance, at the price of having to kill his own side to do so. Some people have tried to use it as a weapon, as it did kill Red Light. Others have tried to fight it, like Kona, who had this big action battle with it, only understanding later that all it did was look at him and gave him the big battle he wanted against himself. It forced him to deliver several self-inflicted wounds. True, there's not a lot of stuff about it, but I intentionally left it open source so other people can use it. And I think that is based, Zero. If you're hearing this somehow, hey, I'm a big fan of yours. I actually voiced your character in Alex Hera's Slenderverse documentary because it just worked out that way. I love your blog. And that, y'all, wraps up the primary creatures of the Fear Mythos and some of the outer phenomena. Now, this isn't everything. There are these creatures known as lepers, which are a part of their own mythology. And if I make this a longer thing, like honestly, I'm probably going to need a couple videos to just fully explain everything with this mythos. Maybe I'll get to lepers. They're such a weird bug thing. Honestly, they really should have their own mythos because they're really not even fully connected to the Fear Mythos in a way. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed me just kind of talking about some of the other weird creatures of internet fiction. Now, I'm sure you've seen my channel. You know I love this stuff. Being able to bring this to the forefront for new people is kind of what I'm hoping to do. The Fear Mythos is really cool. I've been a part of the Discord since like 2017. I'm actually a writer for the Fear Mythos, just I'm not giving away who I am, nor am I giving away what I've written fully. I've already kind of talked a little bit about it, but yeah. So, if this reached someone new who didn't know about the Fear Mythos, tell me. And honestly, take your time and go look it up yourself. You might find something cool. But until next time, this has been Beholder Media. It was so good to see you. And hey, remember, we're only as strong as what we're afraid of.